The fact that Tesla doesn't have a dealership network, I think in itself, within all this context that we talked about and what Sandy brought up, is really what I believe the nail in the coffin that says Tesla will 100% become a mass market manufacturer that is going to be able to retain class-leading margins for the long term, because they have an entire piece of the puzzle that every single other person uses in the United States that's driving costs up to the consumer. And as you're riding this price curve down, every single dollar you can yank from that ability to get that car out to the customer becomes a huge competitive advantage, especially if those companies you're going up against haven't invested nearly as much in the scale of the new technology that's coming out. Mm-hmm. And there is a reason why companies like Ford, GM and Volkswagen and everybody else are trying to start where Tesla started, which is at the top of the price range. They're trying to go low volume, high price first. Low volume, high price first. We can't even talk about the Chinese manufacturers in this respect because they're doing it differently and they have a completely different backing, which bodes very poorly for everybody else except probably Tesla here, right? But there's a reason why these manufacturers are doing that is because they don't have the scale to go to the lower levels to make money. And then you layer on the dealership network on top of it, forget it. Because then they would have to artificially, they're going to have to try to get the car produced at such a price so that when it gets to the dealership, the customer is willing to pay that price and then the dealership and the manufacturer both make money. So you've introduced this giant variable into the equation that for anybody who's been following Tesla, I feel like everybody understands this very well. Even folks that don't follow Tesla, they understand the dealership model really well. But this is where that equation breaks for everybody who has a dealership network. Because if you're really trying to get to the affordable price, your dealership ain't going to try to pocket the money. It's going to be Tesla. And Tesla, if they really want to win and maximize the capacity and advance the advent of sustainable transport, like Hansa said, you drop those levers, you pull those levers that lower the cost as low as humanly possible. And you're doing so in such an efficient manner that the only place that loses, quote unquote, is one entity, and that's Tesla. Whereas if anybody else had to do that, you impact an entire supply chain, an entire service network, and an entire dealer network. And that in itself is super complex. And we only have to go back to what Corey said on the video with Sandy, that the top richest people in Michigan, some of the top richest people in Michigan are dealership owners. Why is that? Because they've been skimming off the top this whole time in mass market vehicle manufacturing. And folks, I don't think might be up to speed yet that Tesla realistically, from the research I've done and the research I'm sure you guys have done and everybody who's probably watching this video, or most people have, is that, because we're also obsessed with the story, is that the only true, real mass market EV manufacturer on planet Earth outside of a couple players in China is Tesla. And everybody else is playing catch up, and some of them are extremely behind. And now this is where the tire meets the road. We are now at the point with these price decreases where the tire is meeting the road. Only those that are best positioned to come out with a mass market affordable car are going to be able to win. And I can only think of one car company that can do that. That's not Chinese.
From the US. Yep.
From the US.
The thing that it makes me think of that it doesn't tie in the dealership network part, but the thing that it reminds me of back in the late 90s, early 2000s, when Walmart was just rolling out supercenters all across the country, and you lived in a smallish town that finally you were going to get a Walmart, and you knew all the mom and pop grocery shops and little things like those places were hosed. Why was that? Well, Walmart had a scale that those other stores could not compete with. They had pricing power that those stores could not compete with. They just had a whole host of advantages. And so, someone's going to say, yeah, well, GM's way bigger than some mom and pop shop. Not when it comes to EVs. Tesla is the Walmart of EVs in this analogy. They make way more than anybody else, apart from BYD, who has a long way to go just to satisfy the demand in China. That another point that Corey made on y'all's discussion this week that was great was more than likely the next battleground for Chinese EV makers is not the United States, it's Europe. And so that does, give GM and Ford and the local people a little bit more time. Yeah, when you've got a company at the scale of Tesla It still doesn't have those lower end vehicles that BYD has, and will get there. Man, that's just scary.
For me, in my mind, like the whole US market is like not really up for debate anymore. Like I just like if you're paying attention, there's a lot of signs that they're not agile, they're not fast enough to respond to the changes necessary to get them to the next stage. They might have some kind of existence supporting the existing ICE vehicle fleets, but I just don't see them getting to a scale that's necessary to actually survive. It's just too late, too little, and it's so like the real thing that I'm starting to focus on and pay a lot more attention to are the people talking about BYD versus Tesla, and BYD like there's a lot of people who we just don't have a lot of exposure to those vehicles, but I do see people talking about it and either that have that exposure or who have been paying attention. It's hard to say that BYD is ahead because of the influence of hybrid vehicles, but there is definitely there are people who can show you electric vehicles made by Chinese manufacturers that are selling, and they're pretty close to the prices that Tesla is selling, and they have features that Tesla doesn't, while Tesla has features that the others won't. You can talk about FSD, but like FSD isn't really working there yet. It's not clear how well it's working yet there or when it will be available there. So like that's not really a thing you can rely on. So I think there is more to worry about in that market. Like as far as a competitive, it's not a place where Tesla should be complacent. And if they were to do something like create like some kind of variant of the Model 3 or Y that catered more to the Chinese population, and there was like one configuration for that, that's something that I would see as a really good green flag, right?
That's why I think I think the compact's coming out in China next year. I'm convinced. Yeah. So real quick, Dan Ives, fellow Penn Stater, we are, for anybody in the comments, we are. Dan Ives from Dives Tech at Dives Tech. Our proprietary China EV survey this week had nearly 70% responded that the most recent price cuts have positively influenced their decision to more likely purchase a Tesla Y, proving the price cuts have been a home run success out of the gate. China EV survey bullish for Tesla. So this is a sort of Dan Ives' firm doing a survey in Tesla. So kind of along the lines of what you're talking about, Tesla not being complacent and stuff. Some of the data sets coming in from the recent price decreases, at least if Dan's data is correct and representative, which, I think he's put out really good research in the past. So I do trust his data sets. I do believe that this is a good representation of what's going on, but that doesn't sort of explain, doesn't make up the fact that for them to continue to be successful in the future, it's price cuts and awesome cars and awesome features, and to ensure that people want to own the car. But this is a very good first data point here. I just wanted to share just along the lines you were saying.
Yeah, that's great.